Thank you, Last Count Corlan. I guess I'll pick up where Deputy Nash finished up in terms of congratulating the Minister on this bill. It is a significant piece of work and an overdue piece of work. And I just want to dwell briefly on something we take for granted and something that we assume, but we shouldn't do. Just how lucky we are to live within a parliamentary democracy. If you reckon it across the whole of human history, or even geographically, statistically, you're very unlikely to have lived within a democracy of any kind, and certainly not within a democracy as strong and as flourishing as this one. And I suppose it's worth mentioning it does come from the Greek, demos meaning people and kratia meaning power. It's literally power to the people, but even within accepted forms of democracy, there's often been a distinction between exactly which people are allowed to exercise that franchise. Even if we think back to Athens, which is considered the cradle of democracy, it was only adult male Athenian citizens who had completed their military training who had that right to vote. And that was limited to 10 to 20% of the total number of inhabitants. And I think that's one of the strengths of this bill, that not only does it preserve and strengthen the form of democracy that we have, and I think an extremely powerful one in that proportional representation, single transferable vote, but it seeks to extend it. Here in Ireland, women only gained a partial vote in 1918. And I think, Count Corley, you had to be 30 years of age and university qualified at that time in order to get the vote. It was only with the foundation of the state in 1922 that women gained equal voting rights to men. And I think many of the provisions in this bill are aimed at extending the franchise to more women, to make it more possible for women to vote, for minority women, and for young people in particular. And I think that's extremely welcome, and I may dig that down into more detail, time permitting. I dosach boire ara agus ta isagum gwil tu tumata I hef an gweilge agus gwil simfui lehagot sa gweilge. Ach ara vain boorha nach wil tagart be civile seo mar shasan sé an gweilge agus bacor gomach agus gomach na saláthir atá ann san teanga go háirithe ó heh arcíochta de curtha san áireamh agus curtha I bhaim civile seo. While they are mentioned in the teanga, and I think that 20% recruitment target in particular, and the last Count Corley spent a lot of time in committee discussing this bill as well, we do need to see it brought through into other bills. There are a number of recommendations that I may be putting forward at committee stage, but particularly in sections 8 to 10, when we set out the Commission's membership, there should be specific reference in terms of language competencies within the Commission, in my view. And also in section 16, which deals around issues of staffing. I do think this should be amended to reflect the targets set out in the Actanga, that there should be a 20% target for staff recruitment who should be competent in the use of Irish. And it has been discussed in some detail what competence in the use of Irish might be. And there are a number of possible other amendments, but Minister, I know that you would have good relationships with the Irish language community yourself. I would encourage you to engage with them before this bill gets to committee stage and perhaps look to bring forward amendments in your own right. I do also want to just draw attention to some of the provisions laid out in Chapter 7, which deal with Dáil and European constituencies. And one interesting area that the Electoral Commission might consider is new proposals recently considered by the European Parliament as part of their contribution to the Conference on the Future of Europe, and more specifically those relating to the creation of transnational EU-wide electoral lists for use in the next elections to the European Parliament in 2024, which would have clear implications in the context of this bill. The proposals, as they're outlined at the moment, would see 28 seats to the Parliament elected on a European-wide basis by all of the 450 million Europeans as one polity for the first time. So it would be a true European election, and they would be European representatives as opposed to MEPs from any given country. These proposals are supported by all of the main groups in the Parliament, from Greens to Liberals, from Social Democrats to Christian Democrats. But implementing such a system poses a particular challenge here in Ireland because we don't use list systems. And so how our electoral system would integrate and interface with this is something that maybe should be considered within the context of this bill. One of my Green predecessors here in the Oireachtas, then Senator and now MEP Grace O'Sullivan, started this debate previously in the Upper House with a proposal for a single Irish constituency in future European elections, which is an interesting proposal. I'm not sure I fully agree with it, but certainly something that should be considered. I think we all would acknowledge that the present European constituencies don't naturally align. I don't know if I identify necessarily with what Ireland South means as an electoral constituency. But whatever system we were using, it's likely that it'll have to integrate a transnational element of some sort into it, and a well-resourced electoral commission could have an integral role to play in such efforts. I do want to spend a little bit of time just looking at specific provisions that are mentioned within the bill that I do very much welcome. So section 88 through 92, dealing with disability, and this is very much about extending the franchise and, in cases where it's needed, bringing the vote to the people. And I think that's really important and really reflects a character of this democracy about how important, how seriously we view the franchise and how we do want it extended. I take exception slightly with Deputy Nash saying that this government has no ambition to extend the franchise to younger people. I think actually that pre-registration of 16 to 17-year-olds is a really important and a really proactive step that will help people in that age really engage with the democracy and take seriously that franchise that I suppose other people have fought and died for, and provisions around the anonymous voter, people who may not, for a number of reasons, be safely identified within the electoral register. And I know that covers, for example, provisions around domestic violence and domestic abuse, and that is really, really welcome. My time is almost up. I would say I didn't spend enough time on it, nearly enough time. The regulation of online political advertising is extremely important. Also in section 52, that obligation on parties to give information regarding the register. We do know that there are people who fundraise outside of the state and spend money outside of the state in order to try and influence electoral results within the state. And I do think that that information is important and people deserve to know it. And also the transparency in terms of micro-targeting. Of course, we should all speak to people where they are in a language they understand about the issues that they care about. But I think they should also have the right to know why it was they were selected for that particular message so that they're fully informed.